just thin jacket. Sometimes
Okay, well, welcome to this session with Great South that we've got today. Two parts to it, which Trudy's going to lead us into. The first part is she'll do the initial part, and the letter of expectation has a series of questions which will come up on the screens behind us, and then Charmy and her team are going to do a presentation as well. So the first part after Trudy is for us to answer some questions about what we want Great South to do going forward into the next financial year. So the floor is yours, Trudy.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. So I'd like to welcome our colleagues from Great South, Charmy and Bobby and Steve and Mark. And we also have the Chair, Ian Collier, joining us on the screen today. So I forgot to ask Liz nicely for the clicker. You can click, Charmy, for me. Oh, yeah. So the process of today is a workshop for Great South to engage with Council to understand what the priorities are from Invercargill City in relation to their work. Apologies.
So that's the slide we
Oh, look.
That's the slide we
Here's one the Mayor prepared earlier.
No.
So we agree the priority areas for 25-26 to be provided to the Joint Shareholders Committee. They will provide, the Joint Shareholders Committee provides a letter to Great South in November. The draft statement of intent will be provided by Great South to the Shareholders Committee and the Council by the 1st of December. And this year the process has changed slightly as we had some feedback from my equivalent at Southland District that we could improve the process and streamline it. And I've got a little bit of greater detail here in terms of why. Because our constitution that we have for Great South never fully aligned with the Local Government Act of 2002. So the date, what's been done in the past on a non-long-term plan year or non-election year is that normally we'd go out with some milestones, which we have done, and we'd have a workshop, we'd collate that feedback, and then we'd come back to Council. But this, in the Constitution, Great South is required to provide a draft statement of intent on or before the 1st of December back to us. And then it's not, please note that the deadline does not align with the LGA, which requires delivery by the 1st of March of 2025. But this is because when the Constitution was drafted, it was written in mind to allow councils plenty of time to prepare their feedback and support Great South to have plenty of time to consider shareholder feedback. So that will, following that, we'll get the draft letter go through to the Joint Shareholders Committee by the 1st of December, and then we won't fully adopt it until it comes back to Council next year.
So, I never quite understood that. Sorry, it was my fault. Do you mean that we will actually never see the draft statement of intent? That's what you seem to say?
The joint shareholders will see the draft statement of intent, and Council will see it again as well.
Okay. So we will see it?
Yes.
Right, okay. I thought that's exactly the opposite of what it said in the paragraph at the bottom of the previous page.
Okay, Ria.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's exactly what I noted. What I noted was that point 4 of the slide was actually ambiguous to the LGA Act itself, especially Schedule 8, Part 1 of the LGA Act. So we had a quick discussion earlier about that, and everything that's there in the first 3 points, for me it's fine, it works out, and it seems quite straightforward. But point 4 is a direct ambiguous statement, and my question was, why doesn't point 4 get removed? Because it doesn't actually help with this process.
I note that. Thank you, Councillor, and I'll talk to staff.
Yeah, thank you.
So Oh,
Can you eventually roll forward to that? Because I'll talk to that.
I think there's a councillor deputy.
Oh, sorry, Grant.
You're right. Thanks, Chair. So how does that impact on the operational process? Because are we landing sort of draft statement of intents, or Great South waiting on statement of intents, and so they're only getting 6 months run at a 12 months program? How does it actually impact on them?
I think I'll defer to Charmy to answer that.
Operationally, it is obviously challenging because we've got, like you mentioned, a 6-month process for a year-long work delivery. I think how we could streamline it is once the priorities have been established, and if they're not too different from the trajectory of projects that we have already undertaken, let's say from year one, this being this year, if it's not too different, then it doesn't really make that much of an impact. But if we are, for example, you say that you don't want us to do any of the stuff that we're doing currently and you want us to consider a totally new avenue, then that will probably be a big impact. So it really depends on the priorities that are set by the councils to us and how we need to enact them.
So just, if I may, a further question. Yep. So what does the operational plan year look like from Great South? So when does it start, when does it finish?
So from the 1st of July and
till the 30th of June.
To the 30th of June. And so once we have a draft SOI and that goes back, finalised SOI comes through, feedback comes through on the draft SOI in March the following year, and that just gives us a tiny bit of room to actually finalise the document, get it passed through all the councils, get it passed through the Joint Shareholder Committee before it can actually be adopted before the 30th of June. So it is quite a tight timeline considering we have 4 councils and 4 sets of schedules that we have to navigate through. However, look, we just need to get it done, so we do.
Yeah, so I suppose the flag I'd raise there is that it doesn't enable Great South to be operationally efficient, because a normal cycle would be 3 months before your end of year you'd be
Correct.
starting on the next year.
That's right.
So I think we need to think about how we can phase it better to enable Great South to be as effective as possible through your operational plan.
That would be appreciated.
Yep. So I can add a little bit to that, Grant. So in the last 12 months or so, we've had a lot of debate with Great South about what they deliver.
Yes.
Each council's had its own version of what's important and priority, so we've gone through a process of trying to get some joint thinking about where the priorities lie. Obviously for our friends in the rural areas, they're significantly different to us, even within some areas that we actually agree that are common to all. So for argument's sake, housing is a good example of that. Yeah. And as we get to one of the spreads, one of the overheads shortly, you'll see what's previously been done by Great South, and it's a mountain of work. And so if we want really quality work, the stakeholders said that we need to condense down and focus Great South onto some areas instead of trying to do far too much and not potentially do it as well as it could be done.
Yeah.
So if you look at that area there, which is up behind me now, which is the key priority areas, in the current statement, we've got a whole lot of stuff there. And certainly some of the workshops that Charmy and Ian ran for us, I think at the Ascot some time ago, helped us condense down that list into some more meaningful chunks that we could get our mind around. And part of today's exercise is to say what's important for us. So for argument's sake, forestry is really important for SDC, not all that important for Invercargill or Gore. Yeah. That's what today's process is about.
We have got quite a big forestry holding.
Yes, I know all that, but it wasn't high on our priority ahead of some other things for us, like aquaculture. You're being facetious. You are. So the questions that, if you can go forward to that paper.
Kills it when you have to explain a joke, doesn't it?
So these are the key questions we want to cover before Charmy starts her presentation. Is what would a successful economic development look like in the next few years? So not just in the next 12 months, but going forward, so that they can forward plan as well, so they're not knee-jerking from one year to the next, because they have specialised staff that are focused in on some of these outcomes. Where does the council want Great South to focus and prioritise its efforts? And in addition to economic development, where does the council want Great South to focus, e.g. Regional spatial planning and housing? So that's the go forward. So they're the three questions that we want to try and answer now before Charmy and the team decide to give us the overview of what they're presenting today as well. So I'm open, Darren, to the first question. What does a successful development, economic development look like?
Oh, it looks like Great South. But I guess what might help them from us and us from them is to have a greater understanding and separation of what in the work plan is Brand Southland that we need to have a share in, and that the others have bought in their share in through the joint shareholders, and what is it that we want for Brand Invercargill. I think if we clearly distinguish those, and if that's the approach you're taking with all the shareholders, that would be good for everyone, I think.
Yeah. And that's where the workshop that Charmy and Ian led, and Steve and others were there as well, led us to that we can't, or they can't deliver all of what everybody wants. There will be some goals that we won't be all that committed to, but we need to buy into it because we want support for some other stuff as well. So, anybody else like to contribute to that first question? Yeah, Tom.
I think we've got to sort of paint our expectations with the broadest possible brush. I mean, we have set up Great South and put into Great South, professional people who are, their whole purpose is to add value to the province. Yeah. We've then appointed a professional board to, govern that and to help them, and set their priorities. And then we tell them what to do, which is a bit contrary to logic, right?
Yes.
And Great South, should never be painted by numbers. It should never have a plan which is in such detail that their only role is to, as I say, paint by numbers. So, I mean, I'm in favour of providing, sure, these are our priorities and the highest level, 4 or 5 or half a dozen or something like that. But I support the approach that we took last year, which was to say, okay, given those high level priorities, for Great South to say, here is how we think we can add most value in those areas, rather than taking it down to any kind of detail.
Yep.
And Great South will come back and say, well, things like, do you want us to work in regional spatial planning? Because that's something that we've got to participate in. But it becomes iterative. What I'm saying is it should just never be us doing so much work on it that we've ended up giving them a plan which is in, fine detail.
So just to reinforce what Tom said, at a previous meeting I went to, he said that we've got to be, these weren't Tom's exact words, but loose enough, I guess, in our guidance to Great South, that we have people looking to the horizon, looking for opportunities that we don't see today, we might see tomorrow, and we can think through some of those that we've had recently, green hydrogen, functional foods, and that didn't end up too well, but it still had some positive aspects to it for the region, space ops and things like that. Who would have picked some of those things up 10 years ago?
But we should remember that they supported the TY argument, TY extension argument, in quiet ways that we don't necessarily always understand. They've supported Fonterra, and since the very beginning, really. And so I mean, there's a lot of things that where Great South don't get the credit, neither should they as being the main, but they are involved in these things, and have supported them.
Yep. Grant.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that Tom's made. I suppose I'd turn it around and say what we should do is ask Great South to come back to us and say, what does successful economic development look like for us? Yep. And most importantly, from my perspective, is what are the outputs? Yep. How will that be measured? So, and if you took then tourism, for example, I would expect to see something like the increase in bed nights across the southern region. That's a measurable piece, and then they might subset that down to the Invercargills, the Bluffs, the Catlett, so that's the. I think it's got to be measurable because that brings accountability in it, and it tells us whether we're on track or on point. And then I think the other point would be, these people and their board plus the operational staff, what are our strengths and what can we leverage for economic development?
Yeah.
We've all got some ideas on that, but that's really their role. And again, they come back and say, these are our strengths, this is what we're going to leverage, and this is what you should expect an outcome to be for us in a horizon of 3, 5 and 10 years.
Yep.
And I think if you provide that sort of framework for a strong governance board and a good operational team, they will get on and deliver.
Yep. So just as a comment towards that, Great South have already done beyond 2025, and that has, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Bobby, but about a dozen or 14 work streams. Each one of them has deliverables and timeframes, and has who the players are that are going to deliver. So it's quite an extensive document. When we first saw it, you thought it was a bit of a wish list, but there are areas that we can now focus on that actually give us deliverables as opposed to something that was a bit more long term and doesn't have accountability to it.
Yeah, so I mean, I was fortunate enough to attend the Fonterra sort of workshops around their annual result. They're our biggest company in New Zealand, right? They've got their strategy on a page. On the front of it is their strategy, it's very clear. On the back of it is the metrics that measure that strategy.
Yep.
So if they can do it,
Yep.
that's what I'm looking for from Great South.
Yep.
Is this is our strategy on a page, and on the back of it is the metrics that align with the delivery of that strategy.
Yep.
And I think that helps us get really excellent value out of this process.
Yep. Agree with that. Ria.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when I think about what would make a successful economic development agency, I'm like Darren, we've got Great South that have been so intricate in so many different sectors of our region that it beggars to the mind really just how far your reach is. So for me, currently I'm worried about things like our export sector and the challenging future that they are going to be facing. So I'm looking at making sure that we are being very, very futuristic with what we can do to protect our export sector. We've got a flight from Wellington to Auckland now taken away, which will help add to that challenge. So I would like to see that sector specifically being given a good lens over to protect what we can export from this region. I also want to look at things like our housing and our plans of where we are doing our housing in terms of our region, because compared to our region in Invercargill, there are two different needs. Part of that is making sure that we've got the right environmental data to where we decide where we're going to plan to put our housing and our spaces for places. And what concerns me on that is that there are various different council climate strategy plans where we each are patch protective and knee-jerk, pulling the strings from what happens in our weather patterns to that certain area, but we don't have a regional climate plan that actually could stop duplication between the councils. And I think that's an area that for housing and for different business sectors that we need to have our finger on the pulse with. Different rainfalls happen for different areas. We know this because historically we've been told this. So, we can't afford to not have our eye on that space either. Obviously, I'm looking through our long-term plan and look at your KPIs that's inside of that. I don't think that it's easy to put everything on a one page and then your metrics on the back. I think due to the different areas of diversification that you have, it's got to allow for a bit more than that.
Biggest company in New Zealand can do it.
That's fine. They've probably got a lot more money than these guys. So, it's to make sure that what you're doing is not only current, but also, as we've all said, futuristic, and those areas are key for me, just some of them.
Yep. So I'll just comment on some of that before we go forward to a couple of other speakers. Certainly, my networking with at the ministerial level and some of the other regional councils is that, and I hope Ian's not listening to this because he'll get all excited about this, but Great South is a real model for success. It's sort of got all the councils sort of connected up. The Beyond 2025 plan is very objective as opposed to subjective, and is open to being measured. So when we talk about what's a stream that might talk about aquaculture, you can envisage with a fast track process that within a year we'll have some significant aquaculture happening here with some very hard data that, talks about $1 or $1.3 billion worth of production in the export sector. So we have some huge gains to get out of that by being connected up. A lot of the data that we've used to lobby for those sort of focuses with central government has come through Great South. Next, Steve.
Thanks, man. I think this discussion is really important, and your feedback and your insight as well from your point of view, because sometimes I guess, and I'm certainly not disagreeing with the Deputy Mayor, but sometimes I wonder, my concern from the outside looking in is that the brushstrokes are too broad at times, and at the same time we're not giving too many specifics, but we're also asking for clear delivery, measure and accountability around those brushstrokes. So I guess my question is, how do we put you in the best position to succeed as Great South? And so that might be based around, where you just see yourselves as an organisation being too stretched, where some of the gaps are, where you are under resourced or just under those time constraints. So I think the feedback is really important for me as well, to understand how we can work together to ensure that where we are giving direction, we're also putting you in the best position to succeed and be able to deliver clear measures, input versus output, right? I totally agree with Grant on that standpoint, and we'll be asking the questions around the output, so we need to set you up strong at the start, I guess.
Thanks, Darren.
Thanks. I've got a comment that might be slightly off-piste, but it comes from something that was said earlier around a regional spatial plan, which I've got to be frank and say isn't the business of Great South. Spatial plans enable the regional plan and district plans of the TAs, and is something that is populated with the work of planners and electeds. You'd have to draft the staff in. We already have them. You already push for money. But that's not to say that the economic impacts of a regional spatial plan aren't a vital part to it. I think your role is to feed in, but I'd hate to see Great South driving it. So if that's just a little off-piste, I apologise, but I just, from a planning perspective, needed to clarify, because regional spatial planning is something that I find quite appealing.
Grant, and then we'll jump back into bullet point 3 up there, which is what Darren was leading us into anyway.
Yes, just the other observation, and it's sort of
You need the microphone.
just the other observation, Rhea twigged it for me, is infrastructure and roading. So the South Island's missed out on the priority list for roading.
Yep.
And if you ask DCC, it's probably one of their biggest pieces of important. I think they've got the biggest roading infrastructure in New Zealand. Second biggest, right? Okay. And you look at Bluff, and we've done Bluff Road, not to death, but so I would see a role that Great South plays around advocacy and their connections and networks is making the case, because we're going to have to as a region, because it's disappearing up north, for that investment in our local infrastructure that really hinges to our developing industries, be it aquaculture, be it the continuation of Tiwai, be it the dairy industry, because open country's growing, they're looking to put more in, and that's going to put pressure on our roads. Now that you could see that as, that's not good, but it is actually a really great thing, because it employs people, pays things, but we can't have underinvestment by central government in it. And so I think that's a really key piece that we need to nail down, and put the investment case and keep banging the door on.
So that's what I was leading into before when I said that in our initial planning out at Ascot Park, we didn't rate roading very high. District obviously did, added in their bridges, about 120 of them, that need work done on as well. And so, and that leads on to the next part of the comment I made, that we sometimes need to support that. Our role as a city in it that services a very big rural area and needs to sometimes advocate for things that are not necessarily for us, putting aside State Highway to Bluff.
But most of the workers from Edendale and from open country down here would reside in Invercargill.
Yep.
So their contribution to our city is linked to a really strong infrastructure that enables the dairy industry to function.
Yep.
So we are inextricably linked to roading.
Yep. I guess one of the things that we've tried to focus with Great South is what can we achieve, not what we would like to achieve.
Yeah.
Because the latter is, we could bang on here for the next 5 years about the importance of the highway to Bluff, which has got the heaviest truck loading of any piece of roading in the country, number one. But elections are not won and lost in Southland. They're won and lost on light rail in Auckland and second harbour bridges and all that sort of stuff, and that's unfortunately a realistic fact of life. It frustrates the hell out of me, because you're right, what we contribute to the economy and what we get back in return is not the same. But sometimes we just have to bite off chunks that we can actually deliver on, I guess. Tom?
Well, I think as we usually do anyway, I mean, there is two quite different sorts of work. You get what I like to call the scanning the horizon type work, identifying the next, successful project. I mean, we've been doing that with things like aquaculture, and, for example, Great South's played a huge part in that. Yeah. But then you got other work which I think is specific projects,
yeah,
where the sort of thing that that Grant just described would be the sort of thing that'd be a specific project that if we decided, yeah, that is something we'd like Great South to do, then rather than just include it in a letter of expectation, I think we would ask Great South to actually give us a quote for what it will cost us. Right? Here is a project. How much are you going to charge us to support that project? And then we decide to go or not. I mean, that's just like any other business. You want to build a new drive, you ask for a quote. So I'd like to see the greatest freedom that we can give them as far as just kind of knowing where the greatest value is. But the other thing I wanted to say was I absolutely support what Grant suggested with a strategy and a page. I mean, I've seen that done very, very helpfully in a number of different places, and taken Ria's point that there are kind of so many things. But usually, look, if you cannot write your strategy in a page, then you probably don't have a good strategy. You don't understand your strategy well enough, and that doesn't mean an A2 piece of paper with 1 millimetre high writing, as I've seen that done before. But you describe it in a way which is, this is actually what we are trying to achieve. Here's the value that we're going to add to the province. Here are the things that we are going to do next year, and you can have another page that says here's the next 10 years, for example. But the next year going ahead. So, I mean, Grant suggested that, and I think that's a really good idea. And I don't think you do that at the moment, Chammy, do you? I don't think there is a strategy in the page.
Not as concise as...
Or as a soap, as everybody calls it.
No, we can definitely work on that one. The creative juices are ready to flow.
Yeah.
It's like, they're asking for an elevator speech.
Yeah,
if you can't give a speech on what you do between two floors, then you probably don't understand what you do very well.
That's right.
So just on the last bullet point now, which is in addition to economic development, where does council want Great South to focus? And we've got two controversial areas there. Darren has started to lead into the spatial planning, so I'll ask him some questions about that shortly, whether that's Great South's role or whether it should be with Environment Southland or council's building into Highland. But I will touch on the issue of the housing, which has been a bone of contention for me for some time. You got your hand up?
I do. If I may just add to that
Yes.
through you, Chair. Sorry to
Go on.
disturb you. But just on that regional spatial planning, just because those three words are up there doesn't mean that we want to lead it or anything like that.
No, I understand that.
And it is just, if through the presentation, hopefully you could see some of the support services that we can provide in order to enable a regional spatial plan to happen. And that's really where Great South's strengths are, and that's our responsibility as your economic development agency to support the work that will enable our development.
Yep.
Thank you.
And so the issue of housing, which has always been a contentious one, I think we've got, from the city's perspective, a really good handle from you guys on aquaculture, on events management, and on new industries, obviously looking to the horizon, and some work being done on tourism, and probably some more work to be done there. But the issue of housing is still a frustration. So we've had a sort of internal portfolio group, which is Leslie and Tom and myself, looking at this, and we've done some work in the last couple of years about trying to get some of our housing needs satisfied. So while we've got Te Pūwai still sitting on the agenda, that does help, but at the moment it's only a small portion of it at the moment, because they're not doing the whole subdivision. The other issue is that for us, which is unique to us as opposed to housing in the rural setting, where they're looking to replace existing houses because of the age of some of those houses, we are not looking for that. We are looking for changing the nature of some of our housing to more elderly care focus, so to get people out of family homes where they no longer want to be in those family homes but can't get out at this stage. And it was interesting that we did a lot of work last year to try and facilitate that, sought government support for about $30 million for 100 units and was told no. And the government has said to us now there's no money. And yet Waikato recently, or this week, got an announcement, I think, of 34 or 36 million to do 100 houses. So they're cherry picking where they want to do that. And I guess the frustration for me is at what stage do we get to a point where we know what we need, and is it then Great South's job to try and facilitate that need, or do we need to do something ourselves? Because I don't think the government support is there for Southland in the foreseeable future. They've got priorities elsewhere, certainly around Hawke's Bay and parts of Auckland as well. So that's my penny's worth on the housing issue. Questions in relation to those two issues, or anything else you think they should or should not be involved with? Trish?
Further to that, Mayor, I think we do need to look at the whole housing thing and which part we take, what we want you to do, and what we will do, and then what the other councils will want you to do. So that may be that we may have a priority after we get to a point or whatever. So I think housing is one that it wouldn't be a broad sweep for everyone. It'll be specific to the councils if that's possible.
What I was suggesting when I said about the housing before is, and Tom will attest to this because he's been around this issue much longer than I have, but we've been talking for 2 or 3 decades about housing needs in Southland,
Yeah.
and we've delivered nothing. And so we've tried to hose out, narrow ours down to the elderly care area, and also to look to the homeless
Yeah.
as a possible thing, because one of the issues that we face is if we are very successful in attracting new industries, often come with very good salaries, they can buy houses or rent houses, and we will have an increasing social problem at the bottom end of our community. And how do we deal with that if we don't get ahead of that 8 ball? And it's interesting when I talk to, well, I don't talk to Gore about it, but when I talk to SDC about their needs, they are very focused on substandard housing in some outlying areas. They don't have a lot of growth, with the exception of Te Anau keeps propping up around the tourism around there. But a lot of these other places are just people living in substandard houses, where that's not our issue. Our issue is we've got the wrong types of houses for the ageing population. So whether we want Great South to go beyond that, and sorry if that doesn't sit well with you, Bobby, but you know, that's a decision that we need to guide Great South on, whether they've done enough and whether they continue to gather data annually for us. But then we've got to take the reins and say, look, what can we deliver, what can we lobby for? Got a whole lot of hands up. Ria.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In my previous role working at Venture Southland, you put out quite a lot of research as to the housing needs, to our skill shortages, to major population issues. I guess for me the question is, you mentioned that elderly housing, yes, we've got that on our council books at the moment. I guess the question, and I haven't found the answer yet, is it the role of council to be specifically involved in providing housing, or as Darren and I just quickly said, isn't it the district plan that should enable that to happen? So we've got a bit of a mismatch going on there. So is it council's role to build and develop housing, or is it the fact that the district plan needs to enable that to actually take effect? We've got the information 2, 3, 4 decades. You know, the information that's out there that was given 10, 20 years ago is still just as relevant today. So I guess the question there is, it's not being enabled, or it has tried to be by different development groups. You know, is it something that needs to be looked at through enabling that district plan?
Yep.
Darren, I'd invite you to.
Yep.
share your thoughts on that.
So you raise a good point. I've had about 15 developers approach me in the last year and a half. They all come with one of two issues. One is the intensity of housing. So can they put houses on smaller sections?
Yep.
And by doing that, they reduce the cost of the overall build.
Understand
And
that,
then the
yes.
cost to the end user, and then often that cost is to those who might want to enter the marketplace. It makes it cheaper for them. Land's a significant portion of the overall housing cost, as we know in the big cities. The other issue is the issue of whether council would free up some of its land, because while we've got spare sections around, some of those are too expensive as well. So a good example is SIT are sitting on 4 homes that they've built at the moment, and they're not getting a market for those at the moment. You go back a year or two ago, there was a backlog of people wanting to buy an SIT house, but they don't have the land to put it on at the moment. And so that's one of the things that we're looking to do as a joint venture with them, where we free up some of our land, make it reasonably competitive price-wise, so that they can put the houses on and we can try and target them to some of the people that might want to enter the marketplace. So you're right, they are, the developers are there now. It was interesting, just about every single developer that approached me said one thing in common: we are not doing anything till we know what's happening with TY. Because they were scared if TY closed, there would be a glut of houses on the market as people went away. So now that's settled, I think some of those players will come into the picture, and we definitely have a strong need from those developers to develop into elderly care. They want to develop units. Some of them want retirement villages, some of them want elderly care, which includes hospital care as well. So they're big chunks of the market, which we can be an enabler for, potentially. I have some more hands up here, Tom.
So, I mean, I definitely favour Great South taking an active role, if I can put it like that, in facilitating houses being built. I think we have, I mean, there's an enormous amount of work that's been done by various people, not least by Bobby, looking at the need and the demographic and all that. I mean, a huge amount of work. And I guess you could keep doing that to a greater and greater level of detail, but you eventually get to the point where you're sharpening the pencil and you lift it still. So, I think actually we're pretty much there. So I think if we can identify an appropriate active role for Great South in that, then I would support that. The other comment on housing, I think we are in elderly housing because previous generations of councils were in their elderly housing. I mean, if we were to start again, if we had none, I suppose, I don't know if we would get into it, but the reality is we have them. We have a very modest ambition for increasing the number. The reality is if we don't do it, nobody else will. It will just will not get done. So, I think that we are in that field and we should continue to stay in that. That's not work for Great South. What I do want to talk about, I mean, you can finish housing first, but I do want to talk about another area in Nobby that
Sure.
I think that we should finish housing and I'll come back to that.
Yep, Grant.
Yeah, just I think my thought is around, are we missing the how on housing in terms of what is the role that council plays and what is the role that industry plays, and so we're very clear. I think if Great South could do work around, we know what the need is. What's the role that we play? So it informs us around planning or some of the other things that we are more vested in and can control. But it equally would then enable the industry to be able to start to provide, you would hope, more effectively for the need. So, my thought would be, Great South, identify all the players and clearly articulate the role that each of those players needs to play to enable us to achieve the outcome which we're desiring, which is 2,500 houses or whatever the report says, I think it is. So, and that really enables all different players to engage in getting the outcome we need. So that's my thought.
Yep, and I agree with that, because I think at the end of the day, our solution is in the private sector. It's not with government.
the market will decide.
Kaingaora only have limited resources in the south, so we just need to be an enabler, as Ria said, to encourage players in the private sector to develop, knowing that there's a need there. Yep, Tom, you wanted to... Oh, sorry, Darren, yes?
Just while we're on the housing, let us not kid ourselves that there aren't people addressing in the private sector
Yep,
facilities for elderly housing, because it is a booming business.
that is.
What we haven't done though, and I think what comes to the point that Tom was trying to make, is that in the retirement villages that are being constructed, we're not requiring them to have some low entry stuff.
Yeah.
You know, it's all high end. And it's the market's job, not as we inherited the stuff that the government built and then we added on to it a little bit to try and do that. Developers, and here's the person who worked as a used car salesman and knows how to blow smoke, will always tell you that they are doing you a favour. They are doing business. And they want smaller sections because it maximises their return, period.
Yeah.
That said, there is the opportunity for us to look at the density,
Yep.
because as long as you can create sufficient amenity, in other words, you're not ghettoising the developments, it's an outcome. We've had housing developments that go below the minimum standard in the district plan from Kaingaora, I think from memory about 6 or 7 years ago, on a template that said, yep, great amenity. We rubber stamp those and you can stamp them wherever you like if you can find the space. Urban infill is something that works well for us from a city perspective in that it makes use of existing infrastructure. The downside, as we've seen in Windsor, is that if you hard fill all the land, because a lot of those 2-bedroom flats don't want a garden, there's nowhere for the rain to naturally seep away. So, you know, those sorts of things need to be addressed. I think the role that Great South could help to play in resolving some of the housing shortage is working on how we attract builders down here, because we can't build houses without them. And, you know, they all shot off to Queenstown and Central Otago to build the multi-million-dollar bolt holes for the Americans for a while. That's a tremendous overreach, and I apologise. But, you know, getting them back here to create that housing resource that the market needs would be really useful. It is not council's job to build houses, period. That is the government's job now, and the market to do. Yes, we have some land, but there's also other land that's actually signalled in the existing district plan, but it's the next thing that we need to look at in the review of it, that doesn't necessarily always take up reserve land or high yield rural land, but it is a point that does need to be addressed, and can be, I think.
So just the last reflection until we go on to what you wanted to raise, Tom. Oh, sorry. I'll come back in a minute, Barry. There was a question thrown in there, I got you, about is it our role to provide housing? And that's the elderly care housing. Well, today's marketplace is that most houses rent out between $500 and $600. If you're a single woman on national super with not a lot of equity behind you, you can't even afford the rent. So that's the social side of it, and if we don't provide it, we would be solely reliant on Kaingaora, and that's not a priority for them.
But similarly, it's not the responsibility of the single retired person in a 1-bedroom unit in Pomona Street
Yeah.
to pay rates to subsidise somebody else to have a house.
Yes, I understand that. It's a complex area. Barry,
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the development in Tramway Road.
and where?
Tramway Road.
Yes, Te Puawai.
All the land there.
Yep.
We don't seem to see anything happening with it.
Yep, I can help you with that. So 700 sections. They have applied for the fast track process, so I understand they're on Schedule 2, and that means if you're on Schedule 2 you don't get a starting point for 18 to 24 months, while they do Schedule 1, which has got 149 projects on it. But they have initially come in to council to seek an initial 30 properties, I think, to do a consent for that. So they're piecemealing it in. It's a different process,
Consenting's easy, we changed the district plan to facilitate it.
Yes, I understand that. But it's an interesting scenario with the development, because normally you have somebody owning a land, and like you say, Darren, they're in it for whatever they can get, but it's actually a charitable trust involved with that, and the profits that go from the charitable trust go into Africa as part of a development of some of the very poorer countries in there. So it's a little bit different to having your normal sort of development, where it's just a profit margin on it.
Alternatively, a developer is putting the money back into New Zealand.
Yeah, Leslie.
As an alternative view, I just want to put forward the fact that what more could council have done as an enabler
Yep.
than we did for both Te Puawai and for the Kew Bowl site,
Yep.
where we actually sold the land at a reasonable price with the intention that or with the very hard understanding that it would be used for a very quick development of housing. Both of those projects, we have to ask the question, what more could council have done as an enabler? And why did developers not respond by going ahead with their projects? Why are we sitting here talking about neither of those projects having basically started or being likely to? Basically, private developers will move at the speed that private developers move at. It has to do with their profit margins, with what they gauge as the right time to bring their developments forward. If we don't stay as a council in the space of housing, we will get no movement at all. If anybody thinks that we can just have another 15 private developers who come in with great schemes that we find years later are still great schemes that mean nothing, but have in both the cases I'm talking about involved council land. Council has to stay in as an enabler, and we have to rely on Great South to be a large part of that regionally, because if we are ever going to get anything out of a government towards increasing and meeting anywhere near that 2,100, then we need a regional economic development agency to be leading that work.
Okay.
Can't just be a little one-off project that's somebody's dream. It has to be systematic work that actually makes the presentation that brings the success, and we can't rely on the private developers to work at the speed we would like to see things developed, and we've got two projects that show that very clearly as far as I'm concerned. So I don't want to sound particularly bitter about this, but I just want to point out that we have waited a very long time for a couple of projects that could have made a huge dent in the numbers we're talking about. They both relied on developers deciding when they were going to take action. Council put in everything we could as an enabler. In fact, Darren has pointed out, we changed the district plan for Te Puawai. So, from my point of view, we very much stay in housing.
Thank you for that. Tom.
Well, a different subject, but a issue that's been certainly discussed, contentious issue actually for the last two of these meetings, last 2 years, has been the extent to which Great South should be involved in climate change work. So I just want to touch on that because I think it's important that they do get a steer. So, I mean, as everybody here knows, where we are at the moment as a region is that we have a regional strategy document which I think has been passed by all 4 councils now. I think they have. And the next step is to develop an action plan. And the committee which has been doing that work, the joint committee, it's not a formal joint committee, but anyway, the joint committee that has been doing that work set a target that we have an action plan covering at least the next 2 years, maybe 3 years, completed by the middle of next year, because we want to, be able to hand over to the next triennium, a useful document. So how that gets done is an enormous amount of work actually. Now how that gets done is it would be led in the main by Environment Southland, Tammy will be involved in that, but there will be support from various other players. And one of the players that's assumed will support it is Great South, right?
Yeah.
So and I don't quite know what the nature of that is, and I don't know if Great South yet know what the nature of that support is, but they will be asked to support it. So I think where we have in the last 2 years kind of pushed back on the idea that Great South do a lot of work in that area, I think we have to recognise, we should recognise, that they are going to be asked to do work in Mead. I think we need to support it in kind of in a principle sense. You know, it's one of the areas that we recognise that they're going to be involved in, and it's gone past a lot of data collection and so forth. It's now about, you know, planning what the action plan should be for the next 2 or 3 years. So I thought I would mention that, Mayor, because I don't know that we're going to be able to get to a point very quickly where we say, well, here are specific actions by Great South. It's more about recognising that Great South might have to support by, let's say, 1 FTE or 2 FTEs, or, you know, something like that over the next year.
Yep. Yeah, and I agree with that. If you look into some of the planning that's been done to date, it sort of suggests that we won't get to net zero by 2050. We won't, as in we in Southland, probably because of our agricultural sector and the way it's sitting at the moment. But that doesn't mean that we don't contribute to the overall country position. So
Well,
if
there's
we don't
that,
get to
but
net
there's-
zero, it's better to be sort of
Well,
on the way than
But
not.
the critical work for councils is going to be adaptation rather than mitigation.
Yep.
And, you know, and again, that's, well, how do we stage that? What are the most important areas to focus on first?
Yep.
You know, are we going to support, for example, you know, work being done at Matara and not being done in Invercargill because we recognise that regionally that's more important?
Yep.
So that kind of prioritisation on a regional basis,
Yep.
an awful lot of work to be done in that, and I think inevitably Great South will be involved in it, or should be involved in it, in my view.
Yep. Other comments around that?
Well, Tom's pretty much said what is the reality. It's past the time that it's given the importance it's given, and it's past the time that we looked on it as a regional view, which means in some cases we may very well be saying it is more important that work is done in another part of the region because of the contribution it makes.
Yep.
Yeah, if you lose Highway 1, not a good thing,
That's right.
you know, for the economy.
Yep.
Okay, thanks for that. Any other questions or ideas? No? The floor is yours, Charmy, for your side of the equation.
Thank you, Mayor.
To tell us what you're going to do.
I'm not able to. Oh, I am. Sorry.
Yeah.
So, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you again for having us. This is a unique opportunity, and I think it's the first time we've been invited for a workshop, so I'm really, really excited at this opportunity. Before we actually speak about what it is, some of the conversations that we had, and quite robust discussions that we had, are exactly the points that we've sort of highlighted. It's work that we've already started, and for us to be able to get to where we need to as a region, we have to focus on what gives us the best yield, obviously, and for you, what gives you the best return for your ratepayers so that we can deliver on those expectations. Our priorities have continued to be the same. I won't go through this slide, it's just, so I'll touch quickly. The presentation format that I've identified is, I'll touch very quickly on some of the priorities, and then the general managers for their particular areas will take you through the work that we think is prominent and really tangible and required for our regional development. But before I actually go further, it was remiss of me, our board chair is online, I believe, and I'm wondering whether Ian wants to say something before I start.
No, you go for it, Charmy. You'll know when I've got something to say, unusually.
Thank you, Ian. Okay, so just to remind the councillors, our priorities were set from the workshops last May and last August. And as we discussed, the discussions it was quite a vast number of priorities, which we've boiled down and categorized into those 4 headings. we have the number of KPIs and what was presented on one of the slides before as some of our outcomes fall within these 4 categories. And the work that we do within those 4 categories is what the GMs will speak to. Our board at the last board meeting gave me a direction on where they feel that we should continue to work for the next few years. Considering that our SOI last year obviously is an SOI, a 3-year plan with a yearly review, which is what we're doing now, they considered that the information and data and insights has been a critical part of us being able to get in front of government, have a cohesive voice as a region, understand what our priorities were, and therefore that information is still a priority to progress further. We, through the work that Bobby has done, we understand that there is an opportunity for data and insights to become a shared services for the councils, so therefore bringing some efficiencies to you overall, or through all 4 councils. Housing coordination, we hear what you're saying, and we appreciate that it is a very difficult situation we are in. Unfortunately, the government hasn't recognized any of our requests or need to have investment come into our city and our region, but it doesn't mean that that's the end of what we will do. We've got a plan. Some of the work that Bobby's carried out this year will identify what are the barriers that we as a region are portraying to the market, to the developers, and how we can overcome them. So as the councillors debate on what priorities you want Great South to consider, it would be good for you to just wait on those sort of discussions until we made our presentations. Aquaculture, as we know, 3 fast-track projects have been identified. We will have the strategy reviewed and an updated strategy completed for this year, and where to next is what we really need to identify for next year. So our key priority, we believe, has to lie with enabling aquaculture and growing it to the 1 billion plus market that we can get it to within the next 10 years. Tourism and events, very, very crucial, especially, from ICC's point of view as well as SDC. Tourism, especially Bluff, and the opportunities that we see that can be enabled there is quite critical to development more of the cruise ships and summer vacations, but also events in business events that will see us through those shoulder periods and those off-peak tourism visitation periods. We spoke about climate change and the work that we do there. And to your point, Tom, unfortunately, Great South has not been involved other than being invited to those workshops for the regional working group for climate change. So what we have done or what we can do hasn't really been discussed quite openly, and more than happy to take a lead and support, because the work that we've done with businesses is showing them the way on how to become net zero and on their decarbonisation journey. And that is a program that we can easily scale up, scale out, and it's really about empowering people to do it themselves, and it's not us doing the doing, or anybody doing the doing, really. So it's empowering that. So that really, we fundamentally believe that we must regionally measure our emissions. It is really important for our export sector. If Southland District, us as a region, want to contribute to the government's desire to double its exports, then this is a key area that we absolutely need to ensure that our export businesses know how to do and can capitalize on it. And as identified, again, thank you, Tom, and Nobby has also mentioned this quite a number of times. The board is quite eager for us to get back to understanding what is our next big thing. So when it comes to our achievables and our deliverables and being able to measure what our outputs are, I feel like we need to have maybe apply an 80-20 rule. 80% of it will be just that, but we need time to strategize. We need time to understand what's going on. We need to be able to evaluate what are the trends and what are the opportunities that those trends offer our region. It could even be challenges in other regions that provide us those opportunities. But if we don't have that time, then we're not going to do you justice for regional development, which is really a long-term game. It's not a year-by-year game. So we do need a little bit of time, and we would appreciate consideration to that when you're making those priorities and identifying what they are. So really, that's all I have.
So
I'll pass see what...
just a couple of quick comments here for you. You mentioned three projects for aquaculture. So obviously the two offshore ones with Sanford's and with Ngaitahu. The one at Makaurau that was listed in the fast track process, so that's not the one that was potentially at Ocean Beach as well? Is that on the card still, do you know, or is that?
So the three that have been identified, Mayor Noba, is Ngaitahu, Hananui.
Yep.
The Sanford one is the small farm at Makaurau. So it's not an open ocean facility, it's an onshore facility.
Okay.
And the third one is the Ocean Beach Impact Marine one.
Okay.
So that's a big smolt
Yep.
factory. So it's only one open ocean.
Yep.
There were several others that we had been speaking to in the aquaculture industry that had hoped that their applications would go through the fast track process, but they weren't picked up. As far as I understand, we had Ocean Farms and Kelp as well. No, we don't. Okay. Two.
Yep.
Two additional.
Yeah, a couple of other quick comments, and one's just a personal one from me, but I can just share with you a discussion I've had with Rob around the unitary authorities, so give you a focus going forward. Certainly it's Rob's view, and personally it's my view, I can't speak for council, that any movement towards a unitary authority will take at least one term, so that's at least 3 to 4 years, and involves some mandating from the communities, but neither he or I see Great South as being absorbed into the unitary authorities as opposed to standalone. Again, that's only my view. My colleagues at some later stage may have a different view, where somewhere like Environment Southland would be absorbed into the two unitary authorities. So just to give you a heads up on that. The other issue is the issue of going forward, the impact of new students into Invercargill, and that impacts all over the place, including housing. So at the moment, SIT is recruiting in Nepal and northern India. They have a goal that the 800 external students that they have, overseas students that they have at the moment, they would like that to be up around 5,000. It was 6,000 before COVID. So that changes the landscape for us in the city significantly if they start to get up to those numbers, certainly around housing. Yep.
Thank you, Mayor.
Kia ora tātou. My name's Mark Fruit, as it says up there. Look, just to frame up a quick overview of where we're going with tourism events over the next 12 months. One is we're part of the diversification strategy for the region. We're identified and beyond 2025. In the last year that we've reduced the team and budgets, and therefore that's focused the team and budgets into the right areas of what we're doing. I think the key for us is that we're strategy focused. We have the destination strategy, which you're all well aware of. And that focuses into areas like Bluff, supporting existing assets, walking, cycleways, museums, etc. And we support growing infrastructure, such as the growth and the build of new hotels opening in the next 12 months. But it also supports areas like capability building, and that means storytelling, iwi opportunities, things like cruise, and we access into those markets. Business events and events, programs, and Invercargill City Centre service agreement are a key part of what we're focused on, and regional connectivity. The visitor economy really helps us grow and improve our connectivity, and that's things like airport gateway in Invercargill, I call it a hub, but that's the gateway to the region. It helps us build that and grow it. And we've seen the pressures that comes under when we have airlines starting to trim back on those services. Pia Pia Tahi Te Anau Manapuri is an opportunity for us to grow visitation through into Southland as well, which involves the sea and roading. Data, develop our regional data for better business decision making. Look, that gives us direction and informs, and as Grant mentioned, measures our progress. And you're going to hear a lot more about that later on. And it's something that we're pretty excited about, even as users ourselves, and what's available for the region. And look, the visitor economy strengthens our communities. And by that I mean it makes the region attractive to live, work, invest, and educate in. And it also supports the economy of those communities as well. Our focus for 25-26 is deliver on our SOIs, obviously, building year-round travel to the region, and that's a focus on not just summer but non-peak, and we've seen softening off over some of our non-peak times. And it aligned, we've got opportunities to align with Tourism New Zealand's off-peak strategy, which is around food and night sky, and we have a big focus on that, and from a regional context. And it's quite exciting in terms of what we can do in that space around that time of year. And look, we do that through trade, our trade channels in tourism. Trade's important. Booking online is great, but we get bookings through trade that support our operators and our hotels and things. And obviously PR and familials. We're budget constrained, but that's not a problem. We just use it better. And things like PR are really strong for us. We bring down the right media and we tell the right stories, which we're getting better at. Business events, incentive and grow the future pipeline. I'll touch on those quickly. But we've got momentum and we need to keep it going. And we've got, we're in part of a collaboration called the Southern Way, which is a much greater regional opportunity for us. And it's focused on slow travel, getting people to come spend more time in our communities and travel in a much slower way. And a key part of that is our airport alliances, and that's the alliance between Invercargill, Queenstown and Dunedin. And both Invercargill and Dunedin have international flights, and we're 2 hours away from our biggest international hub and our biggest domestic markets, which is Auckland, with our direct jet link through Air New Zealand. Trade, some of you will know, some of you won't know, but in August we hosted the Tourism Events Conference here from New Zealand. So that's all the big New Zealand sellers, and they came down here, and some had not been here at all, some had not been here for decades, and they were absolutely blown away by what was going on. And they do spend a lot of time in hospitality and using taxis, and I did get a number of comments from quite a few taxi drivers. Can we get some more conferences like that here? And we're working on it because there's a number of alliances and associations for those things. And MOP, where to next, we're all waiting to hear and find out, and it has sort of been a well-kept secret as to what's coming out next, but I do believe that there is some sort of development that's got to be presented before the end of the year, and as soon as we start to understand that, we know where our opportunities lie. And I just want to finish off with talking about increasing business events into the Invercargill, which works as from a regional level. And look, it's business events, which is meetings, conferences, incentive groups, and incentive events. And one is it reduces seasonality because these are year round. It doesn't matter what time of year we can attract them. And we're very active in that space. And we're kind of what's regarded as a new region in that space, because with Tech being down here last year and our teams working out in that space, we bring a lot of familiars through, and believe me, we've got great assets here that we haven't really highlighted and championed, such as one of our gems is the stadium, but we've got lots of other resources and asset and infrastructure that's helpful. It's economic growth. It's much higher yielding tourism or visitor economy. It's higher productivity sector, which means, by that I mean, we use a wider asset base in our region, and Invercargill, as I said, which is the stadium, civic centre, etc. Regional profile, it's great in terms of, we talked about how do we bring people to the region. It's great in terms of we bring architects, in terms of we can target conferences that make a difference to our region. We can target engineers, we can target things like that, and we get them here. We can be much more smarter how we actually look at what we do in terms of the filter of what we bring. And we've got lots of associations, and it's really growing, and our pipeline is getting fuller and fuller. In fact, we've got a booking out to 2030. So, and that just, I'm not quite sure why that's happening, but anyway, that's the window that we look at. And it improves social outcome, as I said, employment, community, to live, work and invest and get educated here. It exposes us to all these opportunities. And it's diversification because it opens the opportunities to non-traditional tourism businesses. And that's the arts, culture, iwi and the creative sectors because they all get used within conferences and incentives. So that's me in a nutshell, and I'll hand over to my colleague.
So
Bobby.
just a reflection for you, Mark. I spoke at the opening of TEC, and the feedback was fantastic. So that was good. Like you said, not a lot have been here, 350 odd delegates, I think. But some of the one-off events are also understated.
Yep.
ILT said to me recently, the best day they've ever had in the 80-year history was a one-off game between Otago and Southland at rugby, because I was in there bagging off how much money they were giving to rugby as opposed to other sports. And they said they had their heaviest day ever. Now, it was probably influenced a little bit by the alcohol sales afterwards, because Southland actually won. But it just shows you sometimes a one-off event can also do it. The other area, 2 quick comments, is I think we don't have a strong enough development in Bluff yet. But Bluff as a destination point. We've got some opportunities there that we don't sell well enough, and we should be doing a whole lot more work in that area. And the other area that I have some reservation about is the cycling strategy that connects Lumsden to Invercargill. And I'm just not 100% sure personally how much traction, and that's a terrible pun, that we'll get on that. Like we've got some good local cycling things, including Bluff Hill, but whether we will actually get some patronage from people coming all the way down through Lumsden, probably from Central Otago into Invercargill, I'm not 100% sure on that. But just a reflection on that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, but I totally agree on the events. Events are massive for us, and it's one of it's our busiest part of the website is the event calendar.
Yep. Thanks for that.
Can I ask a question, Chair?
Sure, absolutely.
Can you give us an idea about how tourism has grown in recent years, if it has indeed grown? And you know, usually bed nights are as good a way as any to actually have a single number that you can. When Swords set strategy, and it was, there was 3 areas where we thought that there was great opportunity for Southland and Invercargill. One was education, one was aquaculture, and the third one was tourism. And at that time, we had, I cannot remember the numbers anymore, but we had set an objective, a growth rate to, a certain point within the 10 years. I no longer can remember the numbers, but have we grown, despite all the good stuff and, a lot of good stuff, but are we actually grown in terms of tourism? Can you calibrate that for us? And do we have a target, over the next few years?
We've got a financial target of 1 billion in the term of our plan, our 2030. But in terms of you're talking about the numbers,
again, a financial target of 1 million what?
1 billion and
$1 billion as a spend. So that is a total
future.
spend.
Yep.
Right.
In terms of guest night growth, it's been a mixed bag, to be honest, because of we have had strong growth, but then we've been hit with a domestic economy that's not cranking, so we've lost a lot of the domestic market, but we've had a return of international. The region is really diversified in who visits where, and so that downturn in the domestic market for guest nights has hurt here in Invercargill. And so our goal is to how do we attract a more diversified market here, because we still want domestic to come, and they're still trickling through, but we have softened off in that domestic market on the guest nights, and we have, and actually this is not just a phenomenon for here, it's across the country. We've had also contraction around the shoulders, which is kind of like we've gone back to an older pattern where the shoulders were a lot softer, so we've got work to do there. So there's 2 areas of focus. So yes, the guest nights have been growing, but they've softened off due to reasons. We've got work to do on the international market coming here, and we will have an ally next year in that space, and they're already working in that space, and that is Distinction Hotel. And I know there's various comments in the marketplace around how that reacts and how that will work, but they are a very strong sales-focused organisation. And
So you gave me a metric. $1 billion has been the objective.
Yep.
So where are we at the moment?
Oh, we're about half a million. We're half a billion post-COVID.
Right.
So, and we're a little bit.
So
We're
it's
more
to
than that.
basically
Yeah.
double the.
Double.
Good.
Yes.
And is there a time frame in that in terms of an objective?
Yeah, that's out to 2035.
By what, sorry?
2030.
Yeah, next 10 years. So it's within the overall plan. Same targets that we've got for like agricultural things.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Mark before he gets away? Just one reflection from me about the...
Chair,
Oh,
sorry, Chair, could I just ask a question?
no.
Thank you, I'll go back on mute.
Yeah, right. Go to it, Ian.
Just a question, just an idea, Mark, for you and for council. It may be a good idea for us to share with you not just what we're seeing at the bottom of the funnel based on Tom's question, but also show you the NZ Inc. numbers on inbound visitation, Mark, the presentation that TNZ have just done. I think would be really helpful, just at a macro level, just to show those the visitation offshore and what's happening domestically. It doesn't reflect directly on our region, but it'll give you a good feel for where we're at relative to where we were pre-COVID.
I think a high level kind of objective that you'd be sat to remember was to get a sort of per capita share of the tourism market. So in other words, if you divided, the population in New Zealand by how much we spent, we were grossly underrepresented on it. So, we have less tourists and you spend less down here. So the target, I remember, that was set was based on getting our share of the market on a per capita basis. I don't know if that's where the billion comes from, but
It was about, I think correct me if I'm wrong, Bobby, Mark, I think we were, pre-COVID we were 1.6 billion, we were 1.6 billion inclusive of Te Anau. In terms of visitation, sorry, not on spend. Visitation, we had 1 million people visiting Te Anau Milford and about 650,000 through coming through Invercargill, is that correct?
Through the chair, there was about 968 million going to Milford, which is tracked through the 1,000, sorry, through the people taking a cruise. And it's really hard to do the actual numbers because the domestic figures skewed as well, especially with people commuting. So we probably work more on expenditure. So Mark's quite right, we're about $500 million at the moment. It contributes about 5,000 people in the region are employed through tourism, and all of what we're going to talk about in a second with the data repository, all of the information will be available there, so you'll be able to see at any point based on your council or the region exactly what Ian was saying, those reports.
A quick flag for you, Mark. One of the things, feedback I get from the Motorhome Association, which has got 150,000 internal members, and I'm one of them, is that they don't like going past Invercargill. So when we're thinking about destination Bluff, there's nowhere to park in Bluff. And one of the things that we have up for grabs at the moment is we own part of the land down the camping ground, and we might want to think strategically about how best we can cater for camper vans that might want to stay a night or two in Bluff, do the Ocean Beach, do the mountain biking, go across to Stewart Island, because at the moment that's a roadblock. They've got to get a bus from here to Bluff. So there's potential there.
Noted.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bobby, are you next? Yep, excellent.
Thank you, Your Worship. So look, I'm going to talk about three things: housing, aquaculture, and the data repository or DISH. And I'm going to whip through it very quickly because I'm just thinking it's almost dinner time. But look, open to questions. Just to remind you, these things came out of Beyond 2025. So they've come from a place that had 24 pieces of research, lots of input from our communities and business sector. So that's why Great South has been driving them on behalf of the region. So in terms of housing, the first thing we did was we tried to get some data, basically to try and understand, with our 47 houses in the region, what state they're in, what are the needs around supply demand, because at that stage we thought that was the best thing we could offer the conversation because it hadn't been done. The second thing that came out was around the importance of housing for economic development. So over half of all of our businesses said to us that they couldn't gear up because housing was seen as a barrier. And then some of our larger industries that were looking at the region to come and do business or expand were saying that we weren't able to meet their needs. It doesn't mean we have to, because we really want them to look at them as well. But these sort of things triggered for us, really trying to see where we can add value. So what I'm trying to say is it does link to economic development. So in terms of what we've been doing, we can group it into four things. The first is industry liaison and support, and that is around working with key stakeholders, businesses, potential developers, and appreciating the work that you guys have done, particularly Tom and Nobby. It's great. The second bit is around supporting councils, and I'll show you in a second, because you're absolutely right. The questions that you're talking about today are what all the councils are talking about. Your roles as enablers, providers of infrastructure, but also as regulators, and that's becoming increasingly important as the government's position on housing is not quite as clear as it could be. So what we have been doing is working one-on-one with each of the councils, and Southland District Council, for example, have created their own housing plan. You guys are looking at some changes to your district plan around intensification, and what we do is we add value by just going up a step and having that regional lens, but also that private sector lens. The third thing we've been doing is liaison with government, and particularly around funding and advocacy. And that is to support the work that your mayor and your council have been doing. And as Charmy said before, we prepare submissions. There's quite a bit going on, and it's not clear at the moment with a couple of funds ceasing, but there will be new opportunities. So we want to make sure we're prepared with data. In terms of the fourth area, it's around that regional strategic planning and implementation. So there was a piece of work that's still in draft form, which we just call a regional housing action plan. And what we did with this was we identified 13 projects, and it was really just to create awareness of housing from another lens. What we've been doing and what we will be completing by the end of the financial year is delivering 5 projects, as you can see up there. And you could look at these projects as enablers, as the things that will allow the market and others to do what they need to do. So they link to regulatory. So that project 10 there, which Trudy and Jonathan from your end have been involved with, is that we've come in and we're supporting the councils to go through a process where they're looking at how development ready they are for the market. At the same time, we then talk to developers, homeowners, others, to then look at what you guys have said, what they say, and then we'll provide some objective insights that will support you guys, take it or leave it, but it's trying to get to the bottom of it. So that project will be finished by mid-November. Some of those other projects link to data, and they link to the spatial planning part. I hate using those words, Darren, because you're right, it can be interpreted, but think of it like having the right house in the right place for the right person. And we feel like it's responsible that lines up with where you guys think that is. So that spatial planning bit's really important and sends a signal to homeowners in the market. So we can talk about that all day. Okay, so just to sum up in the next couple of slides what we've been doing in terms of that industry liaison, linking with developers, the market, making sure we understand supply and demand with the data. And in terms of what's coming up, we feel like that is going to increase that conduit role. Sometimes as councils, you guys are regulators, you can be quite constrained with how you can interact. We sometimes are a little bit separated. We can support you. And I think the second point there is that development ready project and that regulatory review. And I note the announcement from government about the proposed changes to the Building Act process. So again, Southland's ahead of the game because we're already on this journey. In terms of council support and alignment, we'll continue to support you as you request, again providing that oversight. But I think one of the big things that we're talking about is a regional housing group, which will make it easier for us to service you, because I think there's probably learnings across the councils, and I think there's efficiencies, particularly when you talk about alignment with localised spatial planning. And that acknowledges what you guys said before. You know, people will work in one place, live in another, and they do cross council boundaries. The third area is we've had a lot to do with central government in terms of submission preparation, trying to advocate for the region, and supporting local runaka as well, which has been really important with Papakainga, and there's been some really good wins there. So in terms of next year, we think that that's probably going to ramp up, particularly as some of the government positions become clearer. We think there'll be more focus on private-public partnerships as those conversations around infrastructure come out. And we think that there's going to be lots of opportunities to look at funding, but also to make sure the rules enable what we need to happen. Okay, last slide, data. We'll talk about that in a second, but again, we've developed something which we think is going to be really helpful to help homeowners make decisions about whether they renovate their house by understanding house values, developers, and we're going to make sure that that is consistent and feeds into your processes too. And the last one, which is around the regional strategic planning, you know, we're really keen to keep working on that piece of work to go what else is needed after we do these projects, and how does that link with what you as a council require too. Okay, so just a few things there. So in terms of agriculture, I've only got 3 slides. So look, we've been playing quite a key role for a number of years, right back to 2012 when the regional aquaculture strategy was developed, and that's probably had quite a key role in terms of sending signals to the private sector about, you know, what appropriate types of aquaculture could be considering our environment. So we're planning to refresh that with support of councils, iwi, and we're in the early discussions of what that will look like, because there's also an opportunity for that piece of work to line up to the national review of aquaculture, which is currently happening. A whole lot of bits of regulation, from national environmental standards to policy statements, but also Environment Southland and the Coastal Plan Review, which is underway, you know, which is going to be a key piece of regulation. So I think Nobby and Tom will know from Swords, you know, one of the big things was around how we regulate, make sure we get the right activity in the right place, but it was probably one of the things that held up aquaculture potential being realised. The other 3 things there linked to supporting councils again, and this is connecting things like spatial planning. So we can have these things happen, but they will have workers. We will need certain types of skills in their workers. They will need to live in some places, have transport roads. So that's why the spatial planning comes into these conversations around new opportunities. And I guess another big one is about infrastructure. Okay. This is just a quick example of what we do with Beyond 25. So we look at all the different opportunities by scenario. So TY opens, stays open or shuts, and we understand it from right, what's the impact on housing or GDP or number of workers. So when one thing happens, we can model that. If it doesn't happen, we shut that door. So it's just a way to try to track things happening in quite a volatile market. And I won't go into this too much. Charmy's talked about what's happened in the weekend with the 3 fast-track projects poised to go through the Approvals Act by the end of the year. Yes, there are a number of other projects as well. There is a Regional Infrastructure Fund, which is that $1.2 billion fund, which will line up to this as well. So you probably won't realise we play a wee bit in the background with that as well. Okay, last bit, and then I will be quiet. So DISH. So DISH stands for Data Insight Southland Hub. And the whole purpose of this is to make it easy to find information about Southland. So it will have a whole lot of dashboards and data sets available for people to see. It'll have a breakdown of the key insights. So if you want to understand what the average house price is, you can go in there and see that according to where you live or region or council. but we'll also be looking to provide some reports, and we're just going to chat to your staff coming up about what your potential needs might be, so, you know, with housing, with tourism, with the economy. It reflects a lot of partnerships with suppliers of data, because what people haven't done to date, you've got to go to multiple places to find things. So what we want to do is just make it really easy. And as you can see here, that's the economy dashboard. There's a really handy slide in there about exports, because that's probably something that we talk a lot about. And as we look to play a key role doubling the country's exports, we want to make sure we can measure that. How does that work? Thinking back to those conversations around data. That is just an example of just an interim type of reporting. But the reason why we're talking about a shared service is because we can see efficiencies across the council. Like, this is data everyone's going to want to use. If it's consistent, if we can make it high quality, trusted, reliable, and that's shared, because the data integrity and governance is going to be really important, then that's quite a key goal for us. Last slide is what Steve's going to talk about in a second, but again, the DISH has the capability of looking at geospatial data sets. So geospatial data sets is when the data is presented in maps, and that's quite important when you think of housing. You know, think of your Section 73s with the Building Act at the moment, but again, you don't want to put houses where it might get a bit wet, although that's everywhere at the moment. So that's why we keep talking about spatial planning and the connection to what we're doing. We just want to make sure all these things connect in. Okay, sorry, hopefully that probably created more questions.
Just one question if I can, Mayor Clark.
Sure.
Just on your numbers up there, so I noted your 2,900 people increase 190 million, so that's 65,000 per capita. Per capita is currently 80,000, so that would, if I just draw a simple line in those numbers, that says we're sort of the lower revenue generating, it's lower revenue generating growth we're forecasting.
Sorry, that forecast was what we did for beyond 2025, so it is from a year, 18 months ago. Not current. So once we get into the agriculture stage,
but even then we were forecasting lower per capita revenue growth, because that's what the numbers say.
So it seems like, yes.
Yes, and that was just an estimate, which definitely not the case. So our latest per capita is, from memory, 80,139, which is actually the third highest in the country after Wellington and Auckland. So we've just pipped Taranaki. So really, really good growth at the moment, economic statistics. But what we want to say is, remember the data, there's a lag too. So sometimes that GDP data is up to 2 years past. And especially, so we want to make sure we tell that story, because just the data on its own might be misleading.
Yeah, well, I suppose how it connects back to us is that, you know, with the costs that are coming at us around infrastructure and rates and all those sorts of things, we can't afford to have a lower economy workforce. We've got to if it's at 80, we've got to be targeting 100,000 per capita. Totally. You know, so what are the industries that can drive us to there? So that's the sort of thinking I was thinking.
Good point.
Comment. Were you talking about aquaculture specifically there?
No, just the general.
Just the
general numbers. Yeah.
I comment on aquaculture that still goes to that point though. Bobby, we've got a target of $1 billion, which is nearly a doubling. But if you look at, and I know you know these numbers, but if you look at the Norwegian aquaculture industry, which has got, you know, in terms of water, which has got similar temperatures, it's not greatly different actually from us, and their revenue is 17 billion, it's not 1 billion. And I think the reason for the difference is because we've pretty much given up on using the fjords. So, you know, the Norwegians produce that amount of salmon because they use the fjords for it. But we've, for environmental reasons, pretty much given up on that idea, and I just want to, it's not so much a question as Logan, a thought in your mind about whether, you know, when we see maybe an opportunity to move a little bit forward on that if it's good enough for the Norwegians, you know, usually held up as the cleanest country in the world, then, you know, it should be something that we shouldn't be shying away from, I don't think. Because then you get all the multipliers, as you know, you get the fish food factories as well then, you don't only get the salmon, and that's where you start to add value, because scale, you start to produce things that otherwise you've got to actually buy in, like fish food, for example.
Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How does the data on Southland Data NZ differ from, or Dish, differ from the MB Regional Economic Activity App?
Yep, through the chair, really good question. So we've developed them side by side. So the regional data portal, which is the MB, well, it's actually an aggregation of lots of different ministries. That'll be released very soon. And that gives you, like it takes data from healthcare, you know, right through all the different ministries, and you're able to go quite deep into it. So, you know, look at, on the site. So what we do on Dish is we just send you a link through to that site. So that's why we haven't duplicated that work.
Right.
What Dish does that doesn't is that we have non-government data sets too. So things like, you know, number of people on a boat going to Milford Sound, or the Stewart Island Visitor Levy. Yeah, or QV, so, you know, house values. So what we've done very carefully is develop them side by side so they don't duplicate, but actually we become a conduit through to where there's a lot of other information, one-stop shop.
So no other questions? Just before you lead in, Steve, just wanted to, I noticed in your heading you've got spatial planning there, and that's been spread all the way through the presentation today. And many of us would say, well, you know, what's the role for spatial planning? But the government's given us a very clear steer. There is no city or regional deals unless you've sorted your spatial planning out. And while we'll be right down the bottom of the list anyway, or in the bottom cluster, this has some urgency to it, I guess, that if we want to deal out of government around funding for some of our project work, we've got to have this done.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I guess the need for spatial planning is not a new phenomenon. We've been told that by successive governments for the last 5 years, that it's critically important. And I guess what I'm going to talk about today is the work that we are currently doing. Yep. And the reason and rationale for the work that is currently underway. We'll focus on exports, regional emissions, industry decarbonisation, and energy planning and implementation. So they're the 3 areas of focus. I have to say that a lot of the work that we are doing in some of these areas are private sector commissions. So you know, that's just the setting, I guess. First of all, if we touch on the importance of our economy at present. So currently, unlike many parts of New Zealand, Southland is a wealth creator for New Zealand. We have the highest exports per capita, significantly higher than any other region in the country. And irrespective of what way you cut it, that's critically important. 70% of our GDP in Southland is dedicated to exports and export supply chain. So we can't decouple ourselves from the fact that we're an export region, primarily driven on the primary sector and primary sector value add, dairy, meats, and some other manufactured goods, and aluminium are the major contributors. Obviously fish, forestry and so on all fit into that. The markets that we export to, which are the high value markets, more than 80% of those now have statutory reporting. So in order to buy products from New Zealand, from Southland in particular, we have to be on this pathway towards decarbonisation and lower emissions and environmental efficacy and so on and so forth. Of those countries that that have statutory reporting, 40% already have carbon border adjustment mechanisms. So if you have a high carbon product going into those markets, then the chances are you're going to get nobbled by way of an additional tariff. And for the Asia Pacific region, we have a standard platform of tariff system that was set up in 2003. And what we've seen in the last 5 years in particular is that non-tariff interventions are coming into play. So environmental factors, residual chemical, etc., are now part of the mix and the business of doing trade. Into the US in particular, companies like Whole Foods and so on will not buy products from countries that don't have a plan. And so that's the reality of our situation, unfortunately, or fortunately as the case may be. So as a consumer, expectations are changing dramatically, and distribution globally for our exports is changing. Their requirements are rapidly changing, and not responding to that is not an option certainly for New Zealand as an exporter. Certainly Southland is extremely exposed. So I guess the reality for us is that export markets also have to not only comply or be seen to be making the right steps forward, we also have to be doing that in a globally efficient manner. So transport, energy costs, all of these factors have to be we have to be as efficient as we possibly can be in every area of activity. I won't bore you to tears on this, but as a region, we've contributed $1 billion in road user charges and fuel excise duty towards the national coffers and transport, and we've had $531 million worth of investment. So we're a long way behind the 8 ball. It affects us dramatically now in an area like Southland District in particular, Gore to some degree, and to various degrees in Southland. We're travelling around 61 million more kilometres annually, costing farmers and rural sectors $75 million extra because we have to avoid weight-restricted bridges. So that's the effect of kicking the can down the road. The Bluff Highway is a good example. I know Grant and others have raised this previously. There's around about 3.2 kilometres of the Bluff Highway are likely subject to be an undatable road, as a consequence of sea level rise. So we've got to keep our eyes open and think about investment and the life of the investment. So if there's an effect that's occurring, we've got to know ahead of time what that effect is likely to be, whether it's sea level rise or inundation or whatever the case may be. And I guess as a region, we want to protect and grow those opportunities. It doesn't matter what opportunities are export, we have to think about it in those terms. As a region, we started recognising this issue. The signals have been out there for a long period of time. In 2017, we created our first regional emissions profile. In 2018, we published the first regional emissions profile, and we've been doing that annually ever since. So as a region, we have decreased our emissions by 10% at this point. In the last measured period, it was 14.5%, but we had a whole lot of forest harvest occurred, and planting, we're just in catch-up mode. But what does that mean for Southland exporters? Well, in this year alone, we've reduced our cost of exporting by $33 million by removing that carbon barrier, if you like, for those industries. There are other factors, of course, and that is that to date, our total emissions reduction is around 520,000 tonnes of carbon, which is significant. But also, we're in a period of very significant change. So we're around 670,000 fewer sheep in the region, around 20,000 fewer dairy cows. We're putting on 58,000 tonnes less fertiliser, which has a long-term effect. Now, the reason why I'm really highlighting these things that are not just Invercargill problems, but most of the commerce of the region occurs out of Invercargill, to be frank. And so any of these activities within the hinterland that occur have a huge impact on the Invercargill economy. We know, we've heard earlier, Your Worship saying, workers in Fonterra, Alliance, Tiwai, a lot of them reside in this part of the world. Likewise in Gore, for some of the local industries, they're residing in the urban environment. So this is critically why we are doing this work, and we are working with industry to ensure that we achieve the kind of objectives that we need. So we've had this outreach program for a long period of time, which is training industries, non-profit trading entities, large and small companies, local authorities and so on how to remove carbon and improve the efficiency of their operations in the area of transport, energy efficiency, and you name it. So we go through the process. The process is an empowerment process, as as Charmy mentioned earlier, it's about empowering people to take action and take the right action in a way that you can aggregate the difference you're making. But more importantly, or as importantly, not only do you improve your business exposure to carbon, but you actually reduce your costs. And our organisation alone, for example, by removing carbon out of our organisation, we've saved ourselves in excess of $60,000 a year, just in costs. So that applies across the board. As a region also, an early stage, we established the Net Zero Southland program that was funded through the Ministry for the Environment, Community Trust of Southland, through Venture Southland at the early stage of this, and Tyndall Foundation, through a tremendous amount of consultation across the region. It involved all of the largest industries we have in the region and small industries alike. And we mapped out we were concerned that the government's advice at that time was that we had to be net zero by 2050, and while we thought that was a wonderful aspiration, we wanted to know that this could be achieved without economic and social shock. So not only an environmental lens is applied to this work, but an economic lens is applied to the work across every industry and every sector. We've mapped emissions from every industry and every sector across the region, and we have a plan for decarbonisation with those industries. So that's an active plan. We're just about to review that again, simply because, as we spoke earlier, now that Tiwai is remaining, then we have to look at what the emissions look like with Tiwai remaining, as opposed to just modelling a scenario where 680,000 tonnes of carbon comes out of the equation. I guess I won't talk about this too much, other than simply to say, as an organisation, you can't walk the talk you can't do this work without walking the talk. We have 3 trained CEP audit people in our team. We have thermal energy experts and so on, and we're actively involved in these implementation programs. But for us, we've reduced our emissions by 31%, $60,000, and that's happening across the board as a region. You can't see the entities in here, but to date, 50 boiler conversions have occurred in and around Invercargill. They are reducing not only the emissions from carbon, but they're also improving air particulates. So our programs through Wood Energy South, through the programs we've run Invercargill decarbonisation programs. The guy who's running it used to run a steel mill in Seoul and syngas operation in Korea. He's the guy who's been leading our team. But effectively for our region, Stats New Zealand, for Invercargill, Stats New Zealand have said that we have the highest premature deaths as a consequence of air quality. So removing these industrial boilers out of the system has to improve that. They estimate 124 loss of lives as a result of previously, the hospital emitting into a very poor airshed and having prisons and high schools and SIT and others emitting into those environments. So that's a very substantial change, and we've just finished 13 or 12 conversions this year alone. So there's 50 of those already through the program. We've had 56 Invercargill, I'm just giving you Invercargill examples here, 56 Invercargill businesses that have put in the order of 200 of their staff through the programs, looking at how they, as supply chain contributors or as major exporters or major entities like port facilities and so on, how they can decarbonise their operations so that they are fit to contribute to an export economy or to support the reduction or climate change response. So this is not a dream, not a pipe dream. It's happening, and that's only Invercargill. We're not talking about the whole region. And I guess the other really big part of decarbonisation and being fit for reducing our emissions through export is the availability of energy. As a region, we have a need for around 1,150 megawatts of new energy. We have currently going through the processes at present, 2,600 megawatts of new intermittent energy investment on the books. It's going through the Transpower processes at present. We have another 200 megawatts of behind the meter and other investment currently under investigation. We've modelled 112 new wind sites, including low-level wind within Invercargill, across the region. They're all spatial plans. They're not nice, the proper metrics, international standards. We've also modelled solar, particularly right throughout the region, and we've also looked at, in the southern New Zealand, 10 run-of-river hydro opportunities, all of which contribute to ensuring that the energy that we have locally is generated locally. We don't use a lot of transmission infrastructure, and we minimise the cost of adding value to our industry, to our industry's export sector. We've worked since 2015 in particular, but more recently since 2018, to build a biomass industry in the south. We're currently 215,000 tonnes of wood, what was considered wood waste in the past, now going into boiler operations throughout the lower south, throughout Southland. That has to grow, unfortunately, to around 550,000 tonnes, and we're currently working with local stakeholders to add another 60,000 tonnes this year, and progressively next year and the year onwards, that kind of continued operation. Likewise with LPG, we will be running out of New Zealand LPG at least by 2027 or 2028. We have a plan to plug in biogenic methane back in as a local fuel. We consume around 330 terajoules of LPG, and we hope to run that LPG from waste ponds, etc., into that requirement going forward. So as a region, not only do we have to plan and have a spatial plan for where energy might be generated, but also the route planning for infrastructure, transmission, tier 1, 2 and 3 transmission, and so on. So it's really an important pathway forward. We've modelled, as a matter of interest, all of our grid exit points in the lower south, in Southland, in Southland, and all of our major power infrastructure in and around Invercargill and so on. So that's a big part of what we do, routinely,
I've got a question. The conversion from biogenic methane or LPG to biogenic methane, for domestic use or for only commercial use?
No, for both. Both.
How does that happen? Like, how do we get into everyone's homes to ensure that happens?
Well, I think the first thing is that Invercargill City is already a leader in this area. So the Clifton Waste Pond already has biodigesters and captures biogenic methane. It does go back into a boiler.
Doesn't it burn it off? No, we burn it off.
Yes, So without getting into the detail too much, but basically every tonne of biogenic methane that goes to the atmosphere is the equivalent of 27 tonnes of CO2. So if you burn it or you combust it, you're saving 26 times the greenhouse gas effect. So if we're running out of LPG, which is a net CO2 contributor to greenhouse gases, then not only are we providing a combustible fuel into a positive functioning activity, but we're reducing our emissions. So there's a really, this is an area of quite significant opportunity. So very happy to answer this, but one of the really big parts of what we do going forward is, as a region and as a country, we're looking at doubling the amount of renewable energy coming onto our grid. Many people don't like the idea of solar farms or wind farms or distribution infrastructure. The alternative is not being able to turn the power on. That's the reality for us going forward as a country. So the reason why, as a region, we're way ahead of the 8 ball in these areas is we've been planning for a long time, and we've engaged with industry for a long period of time. So that's a big plus. we need to continue down this path or else we're going to get left behind. But anyway, the other part of what we're doing is very much in the spatial planning area. As I mentioned earlier, the lion's share of the work we're doing is through private sector commissions. We are heavily involved in the use of sea level rise data. We've mapped the entire Southland coastline and Rakiura for the Southland District Council. We haven't done Invercargill, although we have been commissioned by several different parties to look at sea level rise, liquefaction, geotechnical implications and sea level modelling. So we've done a lot of the Invercargill work, and as Bobby mentioned earlier, some of the areas that we are looking at developing in and around the city are highly vulnerable areas, and areas that could be subject to either inundation or other riparian associated flood risks. We've got to get ahead of the game on this and really have a better understanding of where we place our buildings and how we relocate some going forward. So I guess sea level rise, geotechnical work, soils, bathymetry. So we've done most of the Fogo Strait area, mapped the seabeds. For the new aquaculture projects, we've got 2 projects that have contributed quite substantially to their licensing work. We also do gamma ray spectrometry, so we identify specifically where it's good to build. We can look through like an X-ray through the soils. We do that routinely, and as I mentioned, energy planning, land use change and coastal planning are our specialisations. We have a very good geotechnical team doing very significant work. So that's a big part of our day-to-day activity, and as always, all of our technical work is peer reviewed by either the world's best or the New Zealand's best, so we stand by the activity and the quality of that.
Yep, just before we get to questions, Steve, just one reflection. You mentioned there about methane and other gases having an impact. Do you have a lens over the potential for waste disposal by incinerator? And why I ask that is that some overseas countries do that, some countries that are very progressive, as opposed to using landfill. Yep. And I notice now that while the Waipa Council in Waikato has had an application from the private sector paused by the minister, I see that Waimati's got an application back on the agenda again, which they previously had declined by ECAN, but are now looking again to do that.
Yep. Well, I think again, South needs to take get a pat on the back. The regional landfill probably has the greatest level of methane recovery of any landfill in New Zealand. It started at 15%, it's now 75%, and that's been put to good use. That's been actually used for lime conditioning and so on and so forth. So this is a very positive outcome. I think the main challenge is with high temperature incineration is that as a small region, we would have to import a lot of waste in order to support the level of investment required and optimise the returns, and we'd have to address the emissions pretty carefully. It's not impossible to do. If you look at food waste, they've created a hub for Auckland and the upper North Island on the outskirts of Hamilton. That's simply about critical mass, and unfortunately it is a volume game, and it's a consistent feedstock game. Tom will tell you from any process industry perspective, feedstock and consistent feedstock is critically important. If you look at Dusseldorf, they take the entire waste stream from the Netherlands, for example, and use that high temperature incineration to produce electricity to distributed heat for the town and electricity. So you can do it at scale, but it needs consistent large volume. So yes, these are things that are worthy of consideration. Are they the first best choice? Possibly not for us. Yeah,
interesting, because Gore doesn't recycle much at the moment. Balclutha's run out of options. Queenstown is shipping their waste to Timaru. Otago's struggling. So there is potential, I think,
Yep.
for a regional approach as opposed to just a local approach. I
Yes,
mean,
I
a big region, not just Southland.
Yes, I think there is. I think if there's a possibility of repurposing, if you take, say,
Yep.
Tiwai, for example, extending the pot lives, which Tom will know about and others will, that's taking waste stream glass to encapsulate the refractory within the pots. Those are really good outcomes because not only do they extend the life of the pots, they also deal with the waste stream product. Likewise with plastics and so on, repurposing those into other products is a practical intervention. And I think just generally working on trying to reduce volume is a really good public message to be putting out there, you know.
Sure.
Look, we just as a matter of interest, we have mapped all the waste stream material for Invercargill City and Southland District and previously, and there were a really large number of opportunities that existed to do what you do so much easier with less cost.
Yep.
So, yeah, we welcome that challenge
Yep.
for
Thank
sure.
you. Tom?
So, look, there's some fantastic work getting done, Steve, and I, definitely congratulate you for that. I do have one concern. I mean, earlier on in this meeting, I talked about the group that had been established by the Mayoral Forum to develop a regional strategy and a regional action plan, which, and we can't have two.
No,
right?
no, that's what
So,
we've been-
so my question is, how do you, graft? Because you've gone much further than that group, you know that, much further.
Oh, yes.
But we still need one action plan for the region,
Yep.
two, is it? So how do you graft your work into that? I'm not even sure that they're even aware. Some of the people are, supporting the regional work would even be aware of that stuff that you're doing. So how do you graft one into the other? Because again, it would be ludicrous for us to end up with two action plans.
Yeah. Oh, look, we've made no bones about the fact that we've worked with industry. If you want to make a difference and turn the dial in this area, you've got to look where the big emissions are. The big emissions are in industry. They recognise that. They're being pressurised to change by their customers primarily. And what we've been really working on is how to enable that occurring across the region, whether it's the energy planning or...
I'm certainly not trying to stop you doing anything, and I support what you've just said, but
Yep.
again, the output, that should be building towards a regional strategy rather than being a Great South strategy, which is completely distinct from the regional strategy that's been developed by the Mayoral Forum.
Yes. Well, look, the short answer is that we have furnished all of the information and provided all the baseline information for that plan. Yeah, I mean, we've got 4 councils. One doesn't have an emissions plan. We have 3 that have been developed on completely different basis. One doesn't recognise their largest ownership has to be considered in the plan. It is a mess, no question, and we would welcome the opportunity to try and assist and develop that into a true regional strategy. The Net Zero Southland plan, I have to say, has gone through a very extensive consultation when that was created. That's not a Great South plan. That's a regional plan, and that's really what's underpinned most of the work that has been done. So I would say it is essential. What councils emit is about that much.
But the regional strategy will cover all emissions for for Southland. It's not only going to be the council strategy.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I just think, it's just self-evident. I would have thought that you got to get yourself into that process and get your work into that so that it features as it's built into the overall regional strategy.
If I may just add to that,
please, yeah.
We have tried, we've offered, Tom, so if we can get a directive from the group to come in and to support them in any way, we're more than open to doing that. We've sat in on a few meetings, we've identified that there's work that we've done that we're willing to share. We have shared as well, but it's just not being picked up. and rather than the team concentrating and working on something. And it's a lot of time that goes into this. They have other priorities that we have to deliver on. So unless we're actually bought into that as a partnership, it's really hard for us to try and wean ourselves into it. So I think it has to come from whoever the regional working group, the people that make those decisions need to really tell us, and we're more than welcome to help them. But it's not for a lack of trying. I'm sorry to say that, but it isn't. We have tried. We've been in those discussions. We've provided information. We've offered support, and we're more than willing to do that continuing.
I think, look, I will see if I can facilitate some kind of discussion on that, because I think though that there has been a change, because having developed a high level strategy, which is not really what you're doing, you're actually in at the action stage, aren't you?
Yes.
And now that group have moved to develop an action plan on behalf of the Mayoral Forum for the region, that's where this stuff fits in. So it's become important. A year ago it would have been less important. It's become very important now.
Absolutely.
So I will try to facilitate.
Thank you, Tom.
So can I just clarify what's just the discussion? So a group that's been delegated by the Mayoral Forum is completely ignoring information from an entity that those councils fund.
That's what I was going to ask about.
I don't know if they would support the word completely ignore.
Well, they are. That's what they are, because the work's there and they haven't
They
engaged.
haven't been talked.
So I mean, someone needs a bang on the head.
No, I think Tom and I can
probably
bring it
rephrase
up
what you
very,
just said.
very clearly at the next meeting,
Yeah.
where it will carry some weight.
That would be appreciated, because again, duplication is a waste. So why do we do that? They can build on whatever's there, and we can support them wherever needed, and that's what we're here to do.
So, Charmy, thanks for your presentation today and for your team.